Hey, everybody, it's Christian Pedersen, joined by Dan Dickow, back for another episode of the Gonzaga Nation podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in to what I think we can dub has been the most successful offseason recently at keeping everybody's collective national attention, at least somewhat, on college basketball. A ton more. Literally, Dan, I think we started last episode by putting to bed conference realignment talks and saying,
Yeah.
we're gonna get around to that next time we hear something, and then they're like, oh, cool, okay, we'll do that next week then. Thursday into Friday into the weekend, there was a couple of cascading announcements coming out of basically the dissolution and dissolvement of the Pac-12, and or maybe now the Pac-12 is going to do its own merger thing with the Mountain West, or like there's going to become a West super. It seems like this whole thing, we were waiting for one domino to fall, and then the past 4 or 5 days have meant absolute chaos and insanity. So where do you want to start?
That's the question, is where do you want to start? There's lots of different angles. There's lots of different places that you can start. There's lots of schools that you can start with. There's lots of commentary in regards to what the Big Ten, the Big 12, and now the American are trying to do that are going to impact the Pac-12, that are going to impact the Mountain West, that's going to impact the WCC, and obviously Gonzaga. Gonzaga's been sitting on the sidelines doing all of their due diligence, and that's kind of one of the things that we alluded to in the last couple podcasts that have been kind of dedicated to this, and we thought it was done. Right. We thought we were kind of moving on to the phase of prepping for the season and keeping an eye on college football and that clock winding down to practice time. And I go on vacation with my family, and then we're out doing some outdoor stuff. And then all of a sudden I look down at my phone, I get back into the car and I look at my phone, and UW and Oregon, they go to the Big Ten. It's like, what the heck? And then an hour or two later, you pull up another story. Arizona State, Utah, looks like they're heading to the Big 12. So that Pac-12, which will be this year, goes to essentially a Pac-4 next year. So Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, Washington State are seemingly the outliers in that league. You look at Cal and Stanford, they're obviously the most academic of those four schools, Oregon State and WSU being the kind of agriculture schools throughout all of the Pac-12. Oregon State, I believe, was the first member. They were a charter member of the Pac-8 years ago. So, I think for some traditionalists, that's hard to swallow. Oregon State football has been really on the rise as of late under Jonathan Smith, but it's money that's driving this thing. We've said it before. It's continuing to drive this thing. UW and Oregon are premier names. Seattle being a premier city in the country, they're driving it. Oregon with the Nike money of Phil Knight driving their ability to kind of pick and choose. There's lots of different things you can kind of focus in on and chat upon with all this conference realignment. But the bottom line, it comes down to money, and it comes down to football. And the money that football generates and drives is changing the landscape right in front of our eyes. Things that, even 3-4 years ago, when, the SEC was expanding, the Big Ten was expanding, we never thought it was going to get to this. And now it is. And unfortunately, the previous commissioner of the Pac-12 put that league in such a bad spot that its schools, quite frankly, had no other choice but to do what they've done. The new commissioner has come in. He's tried to salvage relationships. He's tried to, salvage TV media rights opportunities. And it just, they were so far behind because of the previous commissioner, they just couldn't get anything done. And then you get USC, UCLA being poached to the Big Ten last year, kind of what seemed like a midnight deal when there was that Pac-12 Big Ten alliance that was proposed alongside, I believe it was the ACC, where it looked like all these conferences were going to kind of be hand in hand, kind of keeping things status quo. Well, that wasn't the case at all. You kind of might now look in hindsight and think that, maybe that alliance was a chance for the commissioners to get to know some of these ADs a little bit more and have their phone numbers on speed dial. So, they could jump at the right opportunity. There's just lots of movement. It's hard to keep track of everything. You mentioned the super conference on the West Coast, with the Pac-4 that we're talking about.
That's the end of one in terms of.
Yeah, you're exactly right.
Happen. Then subparagraph 2 is, well, this isn't going to be the end of it. So what happens now? Yes, go ahead.
So I think what you look at now, and we'll get to the piece of where Gonzaga fits because, unfortunately, because Gonzaga doesn't have a football school, they are a complete outlier. And most of the WCC schools are going to be playing reactionary to everything that will happen after Gonzaga possibly makes a decision and a move. But first, you talk about a big kind of West Coast conference or a Western side of the United States conference. Does the Pac-4, Stanford, Cal, Oregon State, WSU, are they able to salvage something and mold the Mountain West together with the Pac-12? And Gloria Navarez, the commissioner of the Pac-12, was formerly the commissioner of the WCC. She's tremendous. She's always forward thinking. She kind of held San Diego State's feet to the fire a month or so ago when San Diego State wanted to get into the Pac-12, but she was going to force them to pay an enormous exit fee. And then San Diego State pulled back from that. When we look back now, maybe even months from now, that might be the final straw that kind of crushed the Pac-12. We don't know, because maybe that would have been one more team to solidify things, make everybody feel it was in the right path. But anyways, if we're talking about a Western United States Super Conference, I could see the Pac-4 molding with the Mountain West. But do they want all the teams in the Mountain West? That's a question to consider. Does a San Jose State, who traditionally hasn't been very good at many sports, fit with that brand of what might happen? I don't know. It's going to be interesting to see. And then you look at that and say, well, hold on a second. There were rumblings just today within the last couple hours talking about the American Athletic Conference going after Oregon State and Washington State. Well, what I read was they don't want Stanford and Cal. They just want Oregon State and Washington State to fit into that league. So unbelievable, last 96 hours or so in college athletics. And that's kind of a couple thoughts that I've read that are out there on your Western United States Super Conference. Because right now, I don't even know if you technically you will call it the Pac-12 this year. But I think I think pretty soon there's going to be a name that is thrown out there in regards to what the final four teams are, because I can't honestly don't see the name Pac-12 or Pac anything being salvageable, because it doesn't make sense with no UCLA, no Arizona, UW, etc.
To me, it becomes maybe like the Pac West conference.
Yeah, very much so. It could become something like the Pac West. It's hard to say, but there's so many.
If you take the four and you add in the totality of what is available to be added from the WCC and the Mountain West, you get up to about 20-ish, 22, 24 teams, depending on if assuming something major like all three of those conferences move together. That somebody like, Oregon State maybe dips out to the American or something like that. So give or take 20-ish teams. I don't think the math is that far off, actually, from just kind of taking everything on the West Coast and mushing it into something that, is maybe buoyed at the top of different sports by different schools.
But that's funny. You said 20 schools ish, but then what about like the top schools in the Big Sky? A Montana State, a Montana, that drive a lot of interest and have booster money behind them, more so say than some other hard to fund athletic departments in those leagues. What about Grand Canyon and the WAC, Seattle U and the WAC? I mean, those are schools that any conference that all of a sudden is created or expands wants those media markets.
Maybe for that, I would say zoom out just a little bit further and assume that something like the American Conference making its play, like if the West did that, then we're probably looking at like only gonna have 5 conferences in the nation anyway. So I'd assume that there would still be some movers and shakers. So yeah, maybe like a USF and Pacific and Pepperdine get zapped up by somebody that's playing like way smaller school ball. I don't know. Just throwing it out there. But yeah, I think that you're absolutely right that you could maybe toss in some of those other West Coast conferences by geography and figure it out. But yeah, I think maybe we're just not that far off from.
No, I agree. I don't
with a pride on some of these and be like, look, we're going to focus on really maximizing the dollar around these instead.
Yeah, I don't think we're that far off from learning where Gonzaga truly is in this landscape of figuring things out. You know, they're at a disadvantage because they don't have football, but they're also an advantage because they can kind of beat to their own drum because they're such a national presence and a national name, and ESPN wants them on their air. Fox would want them on their air. CBS Sports National, as well as CBS Sports Network, their sister network, is going to want them on the air. There's all these new streaming platforms, which is one of the reasons the Pac-12 kind of held off, I think, making, or some of the schools held off making a decision as long as they did, because I think they were looking at streaming deals and opportunities with Apple TV, which MLS Soccer has done, as opposed to going the traditional broadcast TV rights. So lots of different things that were being looked at there. But, when you look at Gonzaga, I said they're in a disadvantage with no football, but they're in an advantage because they've got, the national name recognition and the presence. When you talk about the WCC and Gonzaga, you mentioned a super conference. Well, now the schools that we mentioned in the WAC, Seattle U and Grand Canyon, I don't think they have football. I know Seattle U doesn't. I'm not sure about Grand Canyon. So do you take two more teams in that league and grow? Then do you go get maybe a Denver University, which is in another big media market? Maybe do you try to get aggressive and try to take a San Diego State? Maybe you even go and take a state school like an Oregon State, WSU, just for, name recognition and put it in the WCC. And now does the WCC go from 9 teams to maybe a 13-team conference? So many things are out there. There's lots of great articles they're being written out. Some have some outlandish ideas. I'm sure you listen to this might be thinking I have an outlandish idea about the WCC expanding that big. It's hard to say. But I think one thing is right now is you got to be ready to make a decision on a moment's notice. Now, I think a year or two ago, you didn't have to be in as big a rush, but now you got to be ready to make a decision.
Yeah. And we will be here to cover that decision should anything come. Dan, is that everything kind of from the recesses of your brain on this topic, or is there anything else we got to let the people know?
Yeah, I mean, it really is at this current moment in time. I still think, I'm disappointed and frustrated with college athletics, but I get it because money drives all of this, and football drives the money being brought into college athletics. So football is going to be the dictator of why these realignments are occurring. I wish there was a way that maybe the heavyweights in football could do their own thing and align where it didn't impact these other sports quite so much, because really at the end of the day, football makes a boatload of money. Basketball at most schools make a lot of money if you're making it to the NCAA tournament on regularly. If you're not, you're probably not making a lot of money. Women's basketball, some of the programs make money. And then after that, if you've got a baseball program that's making money, you're an outlier. If you've got a soccer or a tennis program or one of these other, Olympic sports like swimming, diving, like Stanford, they keep winning this Director's Cup of the most national championships across the country. Yeah, that's great and all, but those are all Olympic sports, and there's nothing against Olympic sports, but they don't make any money. They don't generate any money. Football is the one that's supporting those sports and being able to travel all across the country. And now you're telling me, you got maybe 18 to 20 sports that have to travel twice as much as they did before. It is going to tax some of these athletic departments and figuring out how to get all this done. End of the day, I don't think we're going to be fully done with realignment. I think in a few years, we're going to see another switch, another change. I would personally love to see a Big East conference where it's basketball centric with a Eastern, a Central, and a Western division. I've said it for a year or two now. I think that would be phenomenal for the game of basketball. You could get a lot of like-minded schools, Gonzaga being one of them. Most of those schools in the Big East or the original Big East, were Catholic institutions that love the game of basketball. And so I I would love to see something like that come to fruition. I know there's been some talk of it in different shapes and forms. Doesn't make sense for Gonzaga with the current setup because of the amount of travel. But if they added a Western division, which would be made up of similar WCCs type schools and some others, I think it would make a lot of sense.
Requiem for the Big East is one of my all-time favorite sports documentaries. And if that super version of the Big East does happen, please, will you allow, in your hypothetical, being the commissioner of this, Syracuse to join back in? My personal fandom could use it. Dan, thank you so much. Like we've said, we've got you covered for all things conference realignment. Any more updates coming, just make sure you subscribe to Gonzaga Nation wherever you get your podcasts or follow us on social. Talk to you guys soon.